the world thought their fight was over. But when new truths surfaced, Shen Yue and Bai Lu refused to stay silent. This time, it wasn't about fame or headlines, it was about justice, loyalty, and the promise they made to Yu Menglong. What began as a quiet return quickly turned into a storm that shook the entire industry. And when they stood face to face with those who once betrayed him, the truth they uncovered changed everything forever. The world thought the story had ended, that the quiet sorrow surrounding Yu Menglong's passing had faded into the distant whispers of memory, but it had not for Shen Yue and Bai Lu, who could never shake off the echo of that day, who carried the weight of unfinished justice in their hearts like an unhealed scar that kept reopening with every passing month, reminding them that the truth had not yet been fully spoken, that the world had moved on too quickly while they were still standing in the ashes of everything they lost. It began on a gray morning when Shen Yue was seen stepping out of a studio in Beijing, her face half hidden behind dark glasses, her movements careful but heavy, as if each step was a decision she had been rehearsing for weeks. Behind her, Bai Lu followed quietly, not her usual radiant self, her hands clasped tightly together, her eyes focused on something distant. The cameras flashed, the fans shouted questions, but neither spoke a word. Later that day, the truth began to spread, not from an official announcement, but from a leaked clip of the two actresses sitting side by side in a small interview room, their silence louder than any headline. The interviewer asked the question everyone was afraid to bring up, and Shen Yue was the first to answer. Her voice was calm but trembling, a quiet storm hiding under each word. She said it was not about fame, not about the attention, but about what Yu Menglong had stood for. About how he had been misunderstood, how the final days of his life were clouded with accusations, fear, and silence from those who could have defended him but didn't. She paused, her lips trembling before she whispered that she couldn't stay silent anymore, not when the truth was buried under carefully written lies. Bai Lu's eyes filled with tears as she spoke next. She said she had seen him just days before it all happened, sitting in his dressing room, trying to smile through his exhaustion, telling her that one day everything would make sense. But it never did. He had confided in her, she said, about the pressure, about the things he could not talk about openly. About promises broken by those he trusted. Her voice broke as she said his final text to her still haunted her every night, a message she had never shown anyone until now. And then, she revealed it. The text was short, almost cryptic, just 6 words. But those 6 words carried the weight of a lifetime. Do not let them silence truth. The audience gasped when she read it aloud. Shen Yue reached for her hand, and for a brief moment, both women sat there crying silently, the air in the room thick with emotion, the sound of the cameras clicking like distant thunder. The interviewer tried to move on, but it was too late. The confession had already broken through the walls of the studio and spread like wildfire online. Within hours, fans began trending a new hashtag, Justice for Yu Menglong again. It wasn't just about remembering him this time, it was about action. People began sharing old clips, behind-the-scenes moments, interviews, even fragments of unseen footage where he spoke about wanting peace in the industry, about fairness, about wanting the world to be kinder. Shen Yue and Bai Lu didn't stop there. They announced they were funding a foundation in his name, one that would protect young actors from the mental and emotional pressure that often goes unseen in the glamorous world of fame. The foundation would help give a voice to those who had none, inspired by Yu Menglong's quiet strength and kindness. But behind the scenes, something else was happening. Several insiders began to speak up after the interview aired. Crew members, directors, even close friends who had once remained silent started coming forward with stories of what had really gone on during those final weeks. They spoke of how Yu Menglong had tried to reveal something important before he passed, something about an internal battle he was fighting, about people who had betrayed his trust. It was never fully confirmed what he had discovered, but the whispers grew louder, echoing across the internet like a ghost finally finding its voice. The next day, Shen Yue and Bai Lu were invited to appear on a late-night talk show. They were hesitant, their eyes tired, but their determination unshaken. When asked what justice meant to them now, Shen Yue said softly that justice wasn't just about punishment, it was about peace, about giving his soul rest. Bai Lu nodded and said that the truth always finds a way to rise, even if it takes years, even if it costs everything. As they left the studio that night, a gentle rain began to fall, almost as if the sky itself was releasing what it had been holding back. They walked side by side, not saying much, but the silence between them said everything. It wasn't the end of a chapter. It was the beginning of something bigger. In the days that followed, messages poured in from fans all over the world, from China to the United States, from Korea to Europe, people sharing how Yu Menglong's story had touched them, how they now saw fame differently, how they wished they had known more before it was too late. Weeks later, at a memorial event held in his honor, Bai Lu stood on stage with Shen Yue beside her. The lights were soft, the atmosphere silent and heavy. She looked out at the crowd and whispered that Yu Menglong was not gone, not really, because truth doesn't die, it just waits for the right voices to call it back to life. The crowd rose in silence, tears streaming down faces both young and old, as Shen Yue placed a small white flower on the table in front of his portrait. The cameras captured the moment, but what stayed in the hearts of those watching was not the image, but the feeling, the raw, painful, beautiful feeling of justice finally being heard. As the night ended, the two women stood together under the dim studio lights, holding hands, looking at his smiling photo. Bai Lu whispered something, but the mic didn't catch it. Later, Shen Yue said she had simply said, "We kept our promise." And with that, the story of Yu Menglong lived again, not in tragedy, but in truth, in courage, and in the unbreakable bond of those who refused to let silence win. Because some stories never die. They just wait to be told again. The streets of the city were quieter that night, yet beneath the silence, something powerful was about to awaken. Shen Yue walked side by side with Bai Lu, their steps echoing through the narrow lanes leading to the courthouse. The lights above them flickered, and for a moment, Bai Lu turned to her and whispered, "We started this for him, and we'll end it the same way, for Yu Menglong." Their eyes carried exhaustion, but also something deeper, the fire of a promise they refused to let die. Ever since that final day, when Yu Menglong's laughter had faded into memory, both women had lived in the shadow of unanswered questions. Now, the truth was finally within reach, and neither of them was ready to walk away. Inside the courtroom, the air was tense. Reporters filled the seats, flashes of cameras flickering like tiny sparks of chaos. The faces that once turned away from the truth were now watching, waiting, whispering. The case that everyone had buried was open again, and this time, Shen Yue wasn't afraid to speak. She rose from her chair, voice trembling at first, but strong enough to silence the murmurs. "He wasn't just our friend," she said, eyes locked on the panel before her. "He was a man whose kindness was taken for weakness, whose silence was mistaken for surrender. And we will not let that story end with injustice." Bai Lu's eyes glistened. Her fingers tightened around the silver pendant Yu Menglong had once given her, a small reminder of his unwavering loyalty. When she stood beside Shen Yue, the crowd fell completely still. Together, their presence felt like a storm waiting to break. "Everything they tried to erase," Bai Lu said softly, "we will bring back to light. Every truth they tried to hide, we'll speak it aloud. For him." The courtroom trembled not from sound but from the sheer weight of what their words carried. Across the room sat people who once doubted, others who once betrayed, now unable to meet their eyes. The truth that had been buried was unraveling, one revelation at a time. Later that night, as the verdict loomed, the city outside began to hum again. Crowds gathered near the courthouse steps, holding candles and photos of Yu Menglong. The wind blew gently, carrying his name in whispered prayers. Shen Yue stood by the window, her heart pounding. Bai Lu joined her, silent for a moment before saying, "Do you think he knows?" Shen Yue smiled faintly, her eyes glistening with tears. "He knows," she said. "He's watching. He always has been." When the final ruling came, the tension broke like a wave. The courtroom erupted, not in chaos, but in quiet disbelief. The truth had finally been accepted. The lies that shadowed his memory were gone. Outside, the world seemed to stand still as the doors opened and Shen Yue and Bai Lu stepped into the golden evening light. The people waiting erupted into applause, some crying, some smiling. In that moment, justice wasn't just a word, it was a promise fulfilled. Reporters rushed forward, microphones flashing. "How does it feel to win after so long?" one asked. Bai Lu paused, her eyes steady. "It's not about winning," she said. "It's about him. About never forgetting that some hearts deserve to be remembered with truth." Shen Yue nodded, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "We didn't fight to be heroes. We fought because he deserved peace. And now, maybe, so do we." As they turned away from the lights and noise, the sun dipped low over the city. They walked slowly toward the small park where the three of them once laughed until sunset. The air was cool, the sky glowing gold. Beneath the old tree, the same one Yu Menglong once leaned against, lay a small plaque that read, "For the one who never stopped believing." They stood there in silence, the sound of leaves rustling softly above them. Bai Lu placed the pendant at the base of the tree, whispering, "You can rest now." Shen Yue looked up at the sky, her voice barely a breath. "We kept our promise." And for the first time in months, they both smiled, not because the pain was gone, but because they had turned it into something eternal. The night slowly fell, wrapping them in quiet peace, as if the stars themselves knew that justice had finally found its way home.